Lord, I thank you for this time. I thank you for just the opportunity to study Daniel chapter 6. And Lord, I just pray, Lord, even though it's a popular Bible study and a story that we've known and can recite off the top of our heads, Lord, I pray that you give us fresh insight. And Lord, that you just speak to us this afternoon, Jesus. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Okay, well, you guys have all introduced yourself. I always feel like I'm towering over you guys. But anyways, you've introduced yourselves. My name is Chuck Musselwhite. I am the pastor of the Village Chapel up in Vandenberg Village, which is right by Lompoc. And Connor, who used to be in my youth group and was one of my interns, and now he works up at Calvary Chapel Santa Maria, where I was on staff too, asked me to come down and teach this class for you. So it is my pleasure to do that. Okay, so just a couple thoughts and comments. I know you guys are kind of already into this book, and Connor has given you guys a deluge of information. But, Daniel is one of those unique books in the Bible. Probably there's only a handful of books that are like this book, in the sense of that it's both prophecy and it's both Bible history, and you have people who are crazy about both. They love the stories of it, and then you have people who are crazy about all the prophecy in it too. So there seems to be that colliding of all those two things, and there's a lot of debate as you get into higher education. Like I've taken some classes on whether Daniel is a minor prophet or if he's a major prophet. He's right there at the cusp, literally. His book starts all the minor prophets, and so people have always considered him a minor prophet, just because they've considered the longer books, like the Isaiahs and the Ezekiels as the major prophets. But I would put Daniel in the major prophet, not just because of the prophecy that he gives, because it's amazing. I mean, the correlation between Daniel and Ezekiel and even Isaiah and Revelation is just mind-boggling. And so, but also too, because if you were to line up the people like Samuel and Isaiah and Ezekiel, the true major prophets, I mean, would you not put Daniel in that group as well because of how he lived his life? And he's one of the few prophets where we actually get to see how he lived his life. I think next to Samuel, there's no other prophet that we know as much about his life as we do Daniel, in the sense of how he lived his life out. And so it's a really, really good book. But here we are today, and we're in Daniel chapter 6. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the objective to today's lessons, okay? There's some great stuff in here, obviously, because we all know about Daniel and lion's dens, but there's some challenges too, okay? And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the challenge of teaching a classic Sunday school lesson and how to teach it in such a way where it's not, it's not too shallow, but also it's not too obscure, because it seems that when we get to those stories in the Bible where we know them, frontwards and backwards, it's either is easy to go too little on it or focus on things that we really shouldn't. And so there's some challenges, okay? And so the objective today is to truly look at what's going on. But as Connor told me, class participation is 20%. So I am asking questions, and you guys have to answer. So, but we're gonna have some fun discussions here. So, all right. So just a little bit of background. In chapter 6, last week you guys saw the fall of the Babylonian Empire. You saw Belteshazzar, or you saw the Nebuchadnezzar's great grandson, partying like crazy, and then King Cyrus come in and totally overthrow the thing in a night, which was, here's the mighty Babylon falls in a night. And so these events that we're seeing right here take place right after, okay? And by this time, some of the Jewish captives have returned. If you look in the books like Ezra, in the first year of King Cyrus, he decreed that the temple should rebuild. And so he sent all of the Jews that wanted to go back to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple. Do you know how many went with Zerubbabel?
Hold on, I learned this. Hold on.
How much?
I was going to say 60,000.
It was close. It's 50,000. Do you guys know how many Jews were in the Babylonian Empire at that time? They estimated close to like 2.5 million. So think about that. Even if there was only 500,000 Jews, but there was more. There, over that 70 years they had grown and expanded, only 50,000 of all the Jews who could go back to the Promised Land went back. Okay? And, a lot of them had gotten jobs, a lot of them had set down roots, and they just didn't want to move their families. But Daniel, who was one of the eunuchs, was still there. Okay? And what's interesting about this is when this happens in Daniel chapter 6, does anybody know how old Daniel is?
70, 80.
He's in his early 80s. He's like 81 years old, okay? Why is that significant, you think?
Talked about this.
Why do you think it's significant that Daniel, not that, age means anything, but Daniel pretty much went into retirement once Nebuchadnezzar died. And so that time frame between Nebuchadnezzar dying and King Cyrus ruling, in fact, Daniel wasn't really around until they actually called him in to see what the handwriting on the wall meant. So he'd been in retirement. He was Nebuchadnezzar's right-hand guy, like many Jews had been in many kingdoms. And so he was there. But he really hadn't had much going on until he got called in for the handwriting on the wall. But then when King Cyrus comes in, all of a sudden it changed. They bring him out of retirement. And he plays a major role, which is what lands him in the situation that he in. So let's do a timeline real quickly, okay? I never write with pens, so this is going to be an experiment, okay? So let's just do a timeline right here, okay? And we'll just say this is Nebuchadnezzar, okay? And then this is Cyrus, okay? And so you have a string of kings here who don't last very long, and they're not even worth mentioning. In fact, the guy who falls to King Cyrus isn't even really the king, right? He's Nabonidus' son. Nabonidus has either run away or he's been captured, and this is kind of like a last stand, okay? And so this whole time, Daniel is in retirement, okay? And then the handwriting on the wall happens, then King Cyrus comes in, okay? Now, the reason I want you guys to know that is because right around here, is when the Jews are released to go back to think. And so we see books like Ezra coming into play, books like Haggai. And then about a little bit later, we'll see Nehemiah over here. And so you'll start to see like on this thing that's what's happening from the time of captivity until Daniel we see a lot of books come into play right here. Obviously Esther is in here somewhere too. When King Xerxes is looking for a queen, he picks Esther. So that is Esther right there. So you see a lot of books come into play right here. Okay? And so the reason I want you guys to know that is because Cyrus invades and conquers the Babylonians. He releases the Jews back to the homeland. And then within a year and a half, that's when the whole Daniel and the lion's den happens. Okay? Some of you have their Bible and wants to read the first 5 verses. Go for it.
Okay. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.
Cool. Are you guys all reading the New King James Version?
No, I have the new incorrect.
What version are you using?
The heathen one.
Oh, you guys are NIVs, okay. Which one are you? Huh? ESV, okay, that's what I'm using too, okay. Good, well, at least there's one correct student in here, so, all right? No, just
You need to get a correct version.
on your phone, man, on your phone.
Get the ESV right now.
Yeah, so, okay. Okay, so let's have a little fun right now, okay? Let's talk about, because think about it, Daniel Lionsden is part of the Flannel Board Hall of Fame, okay? How many of you guys grew up going to Sunday school? Anybody? Okay, so you guys remember, I mean this may be too long, but you guys probably had VeggieTales back when you guys were in Sunday Tale. But when I was in Sunday school, they got a flannel board, that was like this felt stuff, and they stuck like these things that stuck on them, okay? And Daniel Lionsden is probably one of the top 5 stories. It was in the Hall of Fame, okay? And so you guys have probably been hearing it since you were in preschool, and every year somehow you guys get Daniel's in the Lion's Den, okay? So, but now you guys are in Bible college. Okay? And eventually somebody's going to ask you to teach a Bible study, maybe to other adults. Okay? Now, teaching it to kids, no problem. You hit the story, it's all cool. But all of a sudden you get to adults and you're kind of like, yeah, no felt board here. Exactly. No felt board. But also, too, you start to say, as every Bible teacher has, I can't teach the same thing. These guys have heard the story 100 times. And so how do you teach this passage? That's something that's so classic. How do you teach it?
You try to make it more applicable to their lives than
Okay.
in the story.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Any other ideas?
Dig up history and details.
Okay. Context is huge. Mm-hmm. The key, always, whether the passage is known or not known, is to always stick to the text. Okay? Let the text take care of everything. Okay? And every Bible teacher has run into this. It's like, every Christmas, every pastor's like, what am I going to teach on this year? What part of the birth am I going to do? Kind of thing. And the thing is that as you are doing this, make sure the text stick out. Now, 2 potholes that you need to make sure that you don't fall into. First is that you don't go too simple. Okay? And what I mean by simple is just kind of cursory over the top of the story, just kind of telling it like a story and not really getting into the text. Okay? You keep it like at the preschool level, the nursery level. Okay? So that's another pothole. But another pothole that you don't want to fall into is to prevent from going too obscure. Okay? And a lot of times we see things in an old story and we're like, ooh, I've never seen this before, and we go off on this rabbit trail and we've lost the major theme of the text. And so what are some of the major themes that come to your mind when you think about the story? We're gonna write them down. I'm gonna find a better pen because this one doesn't write very well. So, give me some major themes right here of Daniel.
Well, there's the one that Connor felt wrong with God's sovereignty in the midst of his dark plan.
That sounds exactly like Connor. Okay, let's just do sovereignty. I don't know. I can't even spell right now. Okay, sovereignty. Okay. This pen doesn't write either, man. Jeez, we need. Okay, let's find another one that writes. Okay. All right. Let's talk about more common themes that regular folk are going to understand. There's some themes that stick out in the story.
It's like, let me use the word boldness. Like Daniel, he's like, he doesn't care what the king says. He knows what he's going to do, and he's going to stick to it.
So boldness.
Yeah.
Okay. Boldness.
Being humble.
Okay. Humble. Okay. What else?
Obedient and faithful.
Obedient. Good. Right? Anything else?
Wise.
Okay, good. Wisdom. I'm going to blow through every pen. All right, so wisdom. Okay, what else?
I don't know what the word is, but there's the fact that it shows in this theme that Daniel was above reproach.
Integrity.
Integrity. That's it.
Integrity, good. What about the other parties besides Daniel? Some other themes that come up.
Right.
Think about the other satraps. Think about King Darius.
Don't make rash decisions, like, because pride.
Mhm.
Part of that.
Mm-hmm. So let's just say pride / vanity. I mean, who doesn't want everybody to worship him and to bow down and pray to him and nobody else? I mean, especially if you're a king. I mean, that's enticing, right? Okay?
Manipulation.
Okay, good. Let's focus on one last one that I think we're going to talk about a lot today, and that is how many of these themes do you think people struggle with today? All of them, especially the God's sovereignty and all that kind of stuff, right? No, seriously though, we do. We have a hard time with God's sovereignty because we want our way. But all of us struggle with these. And you know what? You could approach this chapter from any one of these themes and be right. In fact, you could teach Daniel chapter 6 8 times, all in one of these themes, and never go wrong. Okay? Because those themes are evident. All right? There's not, when you come to these chapters, what you have to realize, there's not one right way. There's some wrong ways, but there's not one right way. Okay? And so the thing is applying those areas to first your life and then in your teaching. Now, whether you guys go off and teach or not, but this is a Bible college class, and so the intention is to do that. Okay? And so the key to teaching a classic passage is to draw out what God is leading your heart to. Okay? While staying true to the text, the theme of integrity may be your major point of interest, but we can highlight the other things too. Okay? Or you may focus on God's deliverance in trials. Okay? Or you may, you want to focus on those who want to hurt us, or how our vanity can hurt not only us or people around us. Just some things, okay? And none of these would be wrong. Okay? And here's the thing about Bible teaching. There's nothing new under the sun. Okay? And so, and that may sound kind of disconcerting, but it's not. You stick with the stuff that's familiar, okay? And what you'll find a lot of times, too, is that people actually look for comfort and familiarity within these passages. They're not looking for anything new. They're not looking for anything fresh. A lot of times they need to hear these things all over again. Okay, so let's jump into the text here, and let's look at the very first verse. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. Okay? So, before we go any further, who is King Darius?
He's the ruler of the Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sure about that? Can you back it up?
Medo-Persian. Yeah, what's the Medo? Yeah, it's the Medo-Persian Empire.
Sure that's not Cyrus?
Yeah. Wait. No, Darius was the Persian Empire.
It's a Medo-Persian.
Medo-Persian. Yeah.
So King Cyrus is the one who released the Jews to go back to their homeland. He was the one that Isaiah prophesied about.
Mm-hmm.
Like 100 years before he came, right? 120 years? So who's Darius? Any ideas?
So like his, just another heir to the throne.
I don't know. That's what we're discussing here. Who do you think Darius is? What are some options?
Says that very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
Okay. All right. So how does Cyrus play into this? Is it? You think it's two kingdoms?
Because it was the Medes and the Persian empires. So like they collaborated. So I guess they split up. They divided the kingdom.
No, because he's talking about the kingdom being divided, right?
Yeah. So it's two different.
You think it's two different people?
Okay, maybe he just has another name.
Okay, why is this important? Why is it important that we determine who Darius is?
A part of the story. A big part of the story.
Okay, okay. And so it's easy to be reading through Daniel and go, okay, Darius, Darius, but then wait a second. We don't hear about Darius anywhere else. We hear about Cyrus. We hear about Artaxerxes. We heard about Xerxes. We hear about all these different kings. Who's Darius? Okay? Well, and the reason I bring this up is because as you're teaching, obviously you can read you can read a commentary, or you can read a church history book, and it can tell you who it is. But what you don't know is that there's actually multiple different thoughts on who Darius is. Okay? And so I'll suggest some of these possibilities, and let's discuss it here, okay? The first, people think that it was Cambyses. Cambyses is the son of Cyrus. Okay, so they think Cambyses is actually Darius. Okay, there's not a lot of support for that, but just in a way to explain it, and also too, Cambyses is probably not 62 years old, waiting to take over the kingdom from his father. People just didn't live that long, especially in a warlike culture. So some people think it's Cambyses, who's the son of Cyrus. A lot of scholars believe that there was a governor at that time, and his name was Gaburu. Okay? Gubaru. So let me get this right. Gubaru. Okay? And they believe that he was the governor of Babylon, mentioned by Nabonidus. Okay? They found the Nabonidus Chronicle in some of the remains, archaeological remains, and he's mentioned. And so a lot of people believe that when he was the governor of Babylon, that Cyrus came in and gave him the kingdom and just renamed him Darius. Kind of like how they renamed Daniel Belteshazzar when he went there. Okay? And he was about 62 when this happened. Okay? So we have a couple things right there. There's a couple other ones. Some people believe he's fiction. It doesn't really play out. Probably the most likely, and it was mentioned here, okay, that Darius is just another title for Cyrus.
But I mean, I don't mean to go ahead,
But-
in verse 28 it says, "So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian."
Okay,
Like different
yeah.
titles going on? Or-
But remember, it's a Medo-Persian empire, okay? And Cyrus, what I believe, okay, this is what I believe, and people can disagree with me, and that's fine. And Connor can disagree with me, that's fine. But as I did the study for this, Cyrus had a Persian father and a Median mother. And so a lot of people believe, most people believe, that Darius was just his Median name. And he went by Darius just to emphasize that. Okay, some people believe it was two people. I have a hard time believing that there were two 62-year-old guys in the kingdom at the same time. Okay, but anyways, and so basically, and it was very common for kings to have multiple titles back then, be known for multiple different names. In fact, they kind of liked to collect them. It was kind of like the more titles you had, the more impressive you were. Okay, so. Yeah.
And how come he emphasized what was so important about the Median than his Persian name?
That's a good question.
Like, why would he favor one over the other?
I could not figure out. Okay. It's just what he decided to emphasize at that time. You could speculate that him being Median was much more amicable to the people who were in Babylon because the Persians were despised. You guys ever seen the movie 300? No. Don't. It's a bad movie. But anyways, the Persians were just brutal, brutal people. Okay? And so he may have focused on that. Okay? So, just some thoughts to who Darius was. Okay? And, Connor could come in next week and, set you guys straight. But I'm just kind of laying out to you. Because the thing you have to realize, and because we don't really know for sure, but the thing you guys have to realize is that as you guys get into higher education, not that you have to be open to other trains of thought, but you have to be able to realize that there are other thought processes and other beliefs out there, and you have to recognize them. As you guys read Pastor David's his commentaries, a lot of times he'll say, well, some people believe this and some people believe this, and but this is the way I believe. Well, as we get higher into our education, as we start to teach, we need to be able to understand and be aware of those things, because you may be sitting in a Bible study sometimes, and somebody may want to debate with you who Darius is. And you're thinking, well, why would you do it? Well, it's just because they heard something different than what you're saying. And it's not that they want to be right, but it's just but you need to be open to that. A lot of times we get so tunnel vision on what we think and what we believe that we're not open to other things, but also too, we get caught off guard when people bring them in. Okay? With stuff like this, not usually, but it's a good example to understand what's going on. But what we do know is that Darius wasted no time in organizing his government. Okay? And he was very, very gifted at this. Okay? He appointed 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom. Now, the Persian Empire was divided into 20 different satraps, or satrapies. Okay? And the fifth satrapy was where Phoenicia, Palestine, and Cyprus was, which is kind of where the Jews were. Okay? Now, here's something interesting. You guys might want to write this down. The word satrap is the word that means protector of the kingdom. So a little bit different than a governor. They were there to do the king's bidding. They had certain requirements like tax collection and revolt suppression and all that kind of stuff. So they were protectors of the kingdom. And over those 120 satraps were 3 administrators or governors. Okay? So they probably split it down the middle and gave each person 40 satraps to be over, okay? Or however they did it. But Daniel was one of those governors. Now, listen to the scripture here, okay? It says this. He appointed 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom David was one, to whom these satraps should give account so that the king might not suffer loss. Okay? So their whole purpose was to make sure that King Darius didn't lose anything that he had. And more importantly, probably, that he actually increase under them. Okay? We've seen several stories in the Bible where, you're rewarded for increasing what your boss has, but it's not good when you don't. I mean, you can think of a lot of parables in the New Testament where, you're given 10 talents, 5 talents, 1 talent, and the 10-talent guy increased his, the 5-talent increased his, the 1-talent guy hid his in the ground. You can think of Old Testament stories. Joseph sold into slavery, okay? And he's bought by Potiphar, and he starts at the bottom, but not too long after that, he has risen to being Potiphar's right-hand man. The reason he's Potiphar's right-hand man is because he did his job so well, okay? And so, but the whole goal was that your boss or your owner would not suffer loss, and really what they're saying is that you would actually increase what your boss has, okay? And so these administrators watched over all of the tax monies, okay? And Daniel did this so well that he became distinguished over all the other governors. Okay? Now, here's a good point to point out when you're teaching this passage. This is the first instance in this story, in this chapter, we see of Daniel's integrity. Okay? Here's an 81-year-old guy brought out of retirement. He's a governor for King Cyrus. Not that he had a choice, but all he had to do was make sure that King Cyrus or King Darius didn't lose anything. But yet we see here, it says that Daniel became distinguished above the other 2 governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. So we see a man who has incredible integrity. And he did his job so well that he set himself apart. And I think this is a really cool point, and a point of emphasis is the fact is that all throughout Scripture and all throughout history, whether your boss is a believer or not, if you make your boss money, you will always have a job and always promote. I go back to the story of Joseph. Joseph rose all the way up to the top of Potiphar's household. He got betrayed, went to prison. Pretty soon, he's the prison warden's right-hand man. And because he was faithful to God, God brought him to the second position in Egypt. And he was valued by every single person because he did his job. Daniel was the same way. Even as a teenager, he was above integrity, or he was above, all the food sacrificed to idols, and after a certain amount of time, he rose above, and he's continued to do that to the point where Nebuchadnezzar found him invaluable. And even in his old years, where he could be just easily saying, let me just do the bare minimum, he is still distinguishing himself. And that shows you what type of person that Daniel is. Well, why was he like that? Well, it tells us right here. It says, because an excellent spirit was in him. Philippians chapter 2. In verse 14 says, do everything without complaining or grumbling, because you live in a wicked and perverse generation, and live in such a way where you will be a bright and shining light. That's exactly what Daniel was. In a wicked and perverse generation, Daniel stuck out because not only did he do his job well, but he did it without complaining or grumbling, and so he stuck out. All these other satraps and governors, they're probably complaining. They're probably gathering around the coffee pot going, oh my gosh, this Darius is just ridiculous. And they're all commiserating with one another. And while they're commiserating, Daniel's over there working, and he's getting things done. And at the end of the day, your work shows for you. And so Daniel was a man that had an excellent spirit. And ask yourself this question: how did King Darius come to know about Daniel before he appointed him governor? How do you think that King Darius came to know about Daniel? I mean, why would he take somebody who he didn't know and set him as one of the 3 governors over his whole kingdom?
Because of his reputation.
Okay? What was that reputation?
He's wise and humble, and yeah, he's just
So like his reputation, I guess, just carried on even after the Babylonian Empire was defeated.
Okay?
I guess he was asking people, and they said, "Well, this dude's awesome because he did this."
Okay.
So, yeah.
What were some of the things he did?
he's just a king.
What was the most recent thing he had done?
The
The writing
on the wall.
Yeah, the writing on the wall.
I'm pretty sure that when King Darius came into town, and and he defeated him real easily. The king of Babylon at that time is probably babbling about handwriting on the wall, and he's kind of going crazy, and I'm pretty sure Daniel's name came up several times because of who he was. And you see, wise men like kings, they know good people when they hear about them, and they want those good people to be around them. Okay? And so Darius was extremely impressed with him, so much so, look at what it says here, that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. He had exceptional qualities, an exceptional spirit in him. And it may refer to his good attitude or abilities, but possibly that the king recognized that God was upon him. And when God's blessing something, people want to be behind that. Okay? So just as when anybody succeeds, there's always a dark side to it. So let's look at verse 4. And it says, "Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground or complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him." So what's going on here?
People are jealous and trying to get him fired, if you will.
Okay? They're jealous. They're jealous of his promotion. But is that it? Is it just jealousy?
I don't know. What maybe not disgust, but kind of just like, yeah, I'm gonna use that word, like, cause that's the word that I think. It's just
Disgust?
Like, yeah, they were just like disgusted at the fact that he was so good. You know
Okay.
what I mean? Like they were.
Like they couldn't
Yeah.
they couldn't come to that level?
Yeah.
Okay?
It says over here, it says, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God.
Good.
It has a lot to do with his faith and God.
Which brings up this question. Do you think that this jealousy had anything to do with racial prejudice? I mean, we don't know if any of these other satraps or governors were Jews. But we're thinking that Daniel's probably one of the few, if not the only Jew that's in there. And we've seen over history that people did not look at Jews well. I mean, the Egyptians couldn't stand the Jews when Joseph was there. That's why they watched the sheep. But what happens 60 years after this? What famous Bible story happened 60 years after this instance right here? Happens in the book of Esther.
They tried to annihilate all the Jews.
Who?
Haman.
Haman. Why?
He hated him.
He hated the Jews. He hated Mordecai, and then it transferred over the whole Jews. But I think that there was an underplaying of this whole Jewish thing, okay? And so how do we relate that to people? When we're trying to teach Daniel chapter 6 and we're trying to talk to people about jealousy, how do we relate that to them?
How do you make it applicable to somebody's life?
Well, how do you, I mean, what if you are in a Bible study or you're teaching somewhere and somebody's real, or, say you're over a youth group or something like that, and there's just a real theme of jealousy going on. You've seen it. As the leader, you see maybe there's a bunch of girls, and they're always nipping at each other, they're always fighting, they're always clicking off and all that kind of stuff. And you realize that there's just some jealousy between maybe two girls or a couple girls. How do you take something like Daniel chapter 6 and teach them about the dangers of jealousy? I mean, what are some of the pitfalls of jealousy?
I mean, if they're friends, their relationship can be shipwrecked.
Okay, good. Loss of friendship. What are some other pitfalls of jealousy?
Like you were saying, if it's like in a youth group form, you can literally split the youth in half. Cause dissension that way.
People like to take sides. Good.
Could make it not appealing to people who are trying to go
Okay. What about internally? What happens internally when we're jealous? What are some of the things that come out?
God.
Huh?
It's not pleasing to God.
It's not pleasing to God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It just shows you that jealousy starts off as a small seed, and it doesn't ever just stagnate. It constantly grows. And it grows through things like bitterness and anger and envy and all that kind of stuff. Jealousy is a dangerous, dangerous thing. Okay? So, because the king planned to set Daniel over all the satraps and administry, the jealousy some of the other king officials had were aroused. Okay? And they go through all of his work and try to find something wrong so they can point it out. Okay? They want to find some kind of flaw in his character or his professional ability, but none was found. And so they decided to do, as you pointed out, there was only one area that they might find conflict with Daniel. And go ahead and read that again.
It says, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God.
So what do they decide to do?
They try to make it like illegal to worship other gods.
Okay? Okay? All right? They're using his religion to bring him down. Okay? And so they wanted to find a conflict, and there might be something with his thing. And the reason that they're able to do this is because Daniel was a strict monotheist. Do you guys know what that means? What?
He believed in one God.
One God. He believed in one God. Okay? Whereas they worship multiple gods. Okay? And therefore, they wanted to ensnare him by forcing him to refuse to worship other gods. They knew that if they made some other law to worship other gods, they knew he wasn't going to do it. They just knew what type of person he was. So they had to set up where he had to refuse to, where he had to break the law by refusing to do something. Okay? And two facts concerning Daniel's religious life are evident from this text. First, Daniel's religious convictions were not hidden. Okay? This goes back to this one right here. The boldness. All right? Goes back to that theme of boldness, personal boldness. Okay? So his convictions were not hidden. He was not a secret disciple, but a man not ashamed to let others know that his allegiance to God was to the God of Israel. Okay? The second thing is Daniel's commitment was such that he would not compromise even in the face of punishment or death. In the book of Revelation, as Jesus is talking to the 7 churches, he always says to the angel of the church of, and that word angel is messenger, so it's commonly believed that Jesus is talking to the pastors of the church. And one of those churches is Smyrna. And Smyrna was an interesting place, but they had a pastor that you may have known or may know about. And his name was Polycarp. And Polycarp was just a young man. He was a disciple of John before John got sent off to the island of Patmos. And when John went to Patmos, they sent Polycarp up to Smyrna. He was just a young pastor, and he ministered there for over 60 years. And his church never got very big. But at the end of his life, there was a decree that went out that basically that they couldn't worship Jesus or God. And so they came after Polycarp, and he actually went and hid in a cabin up in the hills, and they sent the Roman guard up there, and they found him, and when they went to the door, they knocked on the door, and Polycarp answered, and he's like, "Come on in, you look hungry." And he's like, "Let me feed you." And so he had the Roman guard there, and he fed them dinner. And as they were getting ready to leave, he says, "Just give me 1 hour to pray." And so the Roman guard gave him 1 hour. He went in and prayed, and he's like, "Okay, let's go." And they walked back to the city. And the whole time, the Roman guard was so impressed with Polycarp that he kept trying to get him, just recant your faith and you can live. And he's like, "Why would I give up on a God who's never given up on me?" And he walked into the theater where they were going to burn Polycarp at the stake. And the governor's sitting there, he's saying, "Recant, or I'll burn you up." And Polycarp looked at the governor and says, "I may burn right now, but you're going to burn in eternal hell." And so the governor gets all fired, and he's like, "Light the fire," and they could not get the fire to light. And they finally got this little fire lit, and it wasn't going anywhere, and so the governor's like, "Stab him." So they took a spear and they stabbed him, and as his blood came out, it put the fire out. And he ended up dying from blood loss. But Polycarp was this man who never had a great church, but was faithful to God, and even to the point of death. And Daniel's commitment was the same thing. He lived in such a way where his boldness was evident and he was not ashamed of it. So, let's look at verse 7, because we're going to jump into the meat of the thing. Actually, no, let's take a break. Like a 10-minute break. Is that cool? And then we'll get through this stuff, and you guys will probably get out of here early. Is that cool? We get back into it, and we can get done. Because who doesn't like to get out of class early?
That's awesome.
Do you guys have a 5:30 class too?
No.
No?
This is the last class.
This is the last class of the day?
Yeah.
Oh,
It
man.
means you get to eat earlier.
Yeah.
That's what I look forward
Are you guys all staying in the dorms?
Mm-hmm.
to. Yeah.
Okay. Nico Parra is my youth pastor. And so he was the guide dorm leader last year. So now he's up there. So he almost came down with me, but he has to come down for. Are you guys going to be at the conference this Saturday?
For Cultivate?
Yeah.
I will.
You're going to miss Nate Holdridge. He is awesome. He's awesome, so you'll enjoy that a lot. Make sure you watch the videos of it if they videotape it. So it's going to be amazing. And of course, David too. So I can't come because I'm too old. So, oops. All right. Okay, verse 7. Verse 7. Let me see here. Let me get back into my Bible here. Okay. Who would like to read verse 7 through up to verse 10? Through verse 10. Okay, go for it.
So stop after 9? Or
No, stop at 10. Stop. Well, stop. Read 10. Okay.
Alright, so 7, 10. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now then Daniel learned that the decree had been published. He went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened to Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before.
Wow. So, what do you think's going on in the king's head and heart? Pride. Maybe vanity. Okay? So, what motivates a king to make a decree like this?
Something that he really wants with his heart. I don't know. Temptation.
Temptation? Good.
Um,
What else?
I don't know, maybe he felt threatened.
Threatened.
Because, I mean, for me the question would be, well, why would, if he thought himself or his gods to be so powerful, then why would he need to issue this decree?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe he heard, they knew Daniel did have a spirit, maybe they heard of his past
Mm-hmm.
interpretations, so
Mhm.
he just felt threatened of Daniel's God, or any other God that could trump
Okay.
his
All right. But the decree is to pray to who?
to him.
To him. Not to his gods,
Yeah.
but to him. So, he's probably already scared to death of Daniel's God. Because remember, in this mentality, Old Testament mentality was that God blessed. If somebody was wealthy or somebody was successful, their God was blessing them. So he sees Daniel excelling way above everybody else. So he knows that Daniel's God is behind him. So there's almost a certain amount of jealousy on maybe the king's part, but definitely these other people's heart, because they know that Daniel's God is real. That's just the way it worked back then. Okay? And so if they can get, and is Darius really thinking about Daniel when he's making this decree?
No.
What evidence do you have to support that?
Well, weren't they like pretty good friends?
Yeah, like he was kind of bummed when not bummed, he was kind of just upset at the fact that he neglected to think of Daniel, because later in the passage it showed that he was
Yeah.
very distraught over it.
Every king hates to lose a good worker. Every boss, remember I said earlier, I said every boss loves a good worker as long as they make them money, So, and equally so, or probably more so, they hate losing a good worker. Okay? So, remember, King Cyrus had just sent the Jews back to rebuild their temple. He made a decree. It had been prophesied before. And so he wasn't opposed to the worship of other nations under his control. So, what are some other reasons? We'll look at verse 6, and I think it'll give us some insight here. Verse 6 says, "Then the high officials and satraps came to agreement to the king and said to him, 'O King Darius, live forever.'" Read it in the New King James Version.
Verse 6.
Yes.
So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever.
Okay. What word sticks out to you in that verse?
King Darius.
thronged. The ESV shortchanges us because it diminishes, which is one of the drawbacks of the ESV. The reason I use the ESV is because I have a reading disability and I have a hard time with Latin, which puts the verb before the noun. English puts the noun before the verb kind of thing, so it throws me off kind of thing. That's why I use the ESV. But they thronged, and that word thronged is key here, okay? A plot to topple Daniel from the king's good graces was hatched, and the jealous officials went as a group to sell their plan to the king. But that went as a group translates as an Aramaic verb that signifies to be in tumult. Okay? And the verb form used means to show tumultuousness or to come thronging. They went to King Darius, and we don't know how many satraps, but we can assume that the two other governors went. And we don't know, it was a large group of satraps. They went as a mob scene. Weeping, crying. There's this huge emergency. Do you know that this is happening? Oh my gosh. And they're getting the king's attention like there's a problem. And so immediately, King Darius is like, how am I going to fix this? And so there's this mob scene, and it's not some orderly, casual group. They're like, King, can we talk to you about something? They're going, oh no, did you hear? And he's like, what? There's a problem? And so he's like, what should we do? And all of a sudden, all of his advisors are going, let's make a decree that people can only pray to you.
But that was just his administration. Like, they came to him, so he didn't really, so the king himself didn't really make the decision then. They just like helped him kind of, and then he.
They created a crisis and offered a solution.
Okay, gotcha.
So what were they doing? Okay? A good biblical term for that is deceiving. And deceiving in the Bible means to share half-truths. It's still lying. But you share part of the truth, and then you put half of it in a lie, and so it's a deceive. And so they have this, and they're deceiving, and they did not give Darius time to think through the ramifications of his decision because of the urgency of the mob. Why do you think that Pontius Pilate gave up Barabbas?
So he wouldn't ignite the uproar even more so. We can keep the calm.
I think he felt like everybody was kind of behind him on this decision, so he's like, okay, well, I need to make a decision now. And so without even really thinking and processing, I think that he was like, okay, well, everybody's backing up this decision, so let's just make that decision.
Okay? Or could it be that the mob's yelling, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, give us Barabbas? Pilate knows that Barabbas is probably the worst person to release. And he brought up Barabbas because he's like, here's the worst person, and I'm going to give you Jesus. Jesus looks so much better than them. And they're like, crucify Jesus. And Pilate's like, what the heck's going on? They should have chosen Jesus. So he washes his hands. But it's because the mob scene was going, crucify him, crucify him. And he created that crisis and kind of thing. And Pilate's like, okay, I'll give you what you want. And a lot of times leaders, they have so many decisions to make. And they have so much stress on them already. When there's a stress that seems like it's an emergency, a lot of times they'll just make a quick decision just to get it off their hands. And they don't think through it quickly enough. So, obviously the vanity backfired, because we see in verse 14, if you scroll down to verse 14, it says, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, King, O king, that is the law of Medo-Persians, that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. And so his vanity, his pride, backfired on him. And I want you guys to look at a couple things in verse 14 and 15. First, he was greatly displeased with himself. Notice how King Darius doesn't blame anybody else. He's displeased with himself because he has nobody else to blame except himself. He set his heart to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the going down of the sun. That's all the time he had. But he worked until the very last moment to try to get it worked out, and it didn't work out. And it shows us the ramifications of our pride and our vanity. When we make decisions based on our pride and vanity, we're often displeased with ourselves. It's an inward thing, an inward ramification. We become difficult to live with ourselves. And then we set about to try to change things. And we're frustrated when we can't. But oftentimes our pride and vanity has ramifications outside of us as well. Because a lot of times our pride and vanity affects people outside of us and most valuable to us. It's hard. It's hard. Okay, so let's keep looking here. Let's go back up to verse 10. And I want you guys to look at this verse 10 because I want you to look at the integrity of a man. It says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Okay. You guys point out things that stick out to you in this one verse. Okay? What sticks out to you?
That he still prayed openly in front of everybody to see him.
How?
By literally going to the open windows and praying to Jerusalem where the temple is.
Why didn't he just close the windows?
Because you want people to see him publicly?
Do you think it was a thing that he wanted people to see him? That could be.
Because, like it says, it was something he had always done.
It was part of his routine. So he wasn't going to change his routine because of some decree. What does that show you about Daniel? What does it show you about his priorities?
He's not going to put anything above God. God first.
And that is one of the keys to integrity, is that we set our priorities and we don't go against them. So we've seen Daniel's work ethic. We've seen his strong faith. Now we see his integrity in action. And he doesn't go into hiding out of fear for his faith. He doesn't go into hiding. He doesn't shut the windows. He goes to where he's always gone. He could have easily done it in seclusion and nobody known about it. But he wasn't going to change who he was or what he did to his God to appease people. He didn't deviate from his routine. And I like the very first part, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed. He knew about the ordinance. So it wasn't like he could make an excuse like, oh, I didn't know. Oh, did that get passed? I heard about that. Daniel was not a person who made excuses. And that's huge in integrity. He had his priorities right. He did not deviate. And he did not make excuses. He stuck by what he believed and he continued to do it, even though he knew the ramifications. Wow. Think about that for just a second. There's a lot in that verse right there. I don't know about you, but every time I say that he prayed 3 times a day, I get convicted. Some people might say, oh, well, it's kind of legalism and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, I don't pray 3 times a day. I pray throughout the day when I'm like, oh, God, like, please help me not get a ticket because I have to speed or something like that, But, I mean, literally, like, he set aside 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And he went into that room and he had a place that faced towards Jerusalem. What's the significance of that? What's in Jerusalem? And what else?
God, like the holy place.
What's in the Holy of Holies?
The Ark of the Covenant.
And what's that representative of?
God's presence.
God's presence. Physically, he prayed towards God's presence. Now, obviously, we don't have anything. You guys can go back to your dorm room and pray towards Calvary Santa Barbara. It's not, it's like, that's just what they did in the Old Testament. But the symbolism is huge. He wanted to be faced towards the presence of God. Even though the temple's in ruins, even though nobody knows where the ark is, he wanted to be facing that way. And we always turn our face towards God when we're seeking him. I heard a funny story a year ago. I was at a conference, and the worship leader's like, I was leading worship at a church on Sunday, and there was this guy. He was on the front row, and he's singing, he's worshiping, and all of a sudden, like, he reaches down in his pocket, he pulls out, and he's like, and then puts his phone back in his pocket, and then goes back up like this kind of thing. And I was just kind of cracking up because that's the distracted culture that we live in today. Daniel was undistracted. Daniel was honed in. You want to know where Daniel's power came from? It came from these times right there. He found the power in God because he spent the time in prayer. And you guys are in Bible college, man. You guys have the time to be able to do that. And I want to encourage you guys, don't deviate. Get a routine and don't deviate from it. All right? Because when you do, you see the power and the presence of God. So let's keep reading here. In verse 16. Who would like to read verse 16 through verse 22? Who would like to read that? Who hasn't read? You read it? Okay, 16.
So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king."
All right. We'll finish up it a little bit in just a second. But, so the decrees happen. He can't get out of it. He brings Daniel. And look at the tone that changes in Darius. He said, the king says to him in verse 16, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." See what his language starting to change? Because not only is the king realizing what he's done wrong, the only person who has any hope left is Daniel's God. And it's amazing when everything else is eliminated. And it's just us and God, how our language changes. When we can trust in ourselves, our language is full of confidence in this. When we can trust in other people, we have a hope. But when it's only God, there's that desperation. And pretty soon we start to talk to him reverently. oh God, oh almighty God of heaven, kind of thing. We start to throw in all the adjectives and all that kind of stuff. You can do it. God's like, why didn't you start this way? And so we see this, and they put, and he basically says, may your God deliver you. So we actually see a faint hope in Darius that Daniel's God would deliver him. And we know our God is the God of deliverance. And so they brought a stone and they laid it on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, which means he had a ring, and they put like wax on it. He put his signet so nobody could come and do anything at the threat of death. And nothing could be changed. Then the king went to his palace, and this is a huge thing. He didn't eat. He didn't have entertainment. He didn't have anything. He totally denied himself and didn't sleep. And it shows you not just how much he cares for Daniel, but that he wants to see God work. And we see a secular pagan king fasting, denying himself, and worrying over that God would do something. And God does something. And at the first break of day, man, he's like out the door. As soon as the sun comes, boom, he's running over there. And I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen the VeggieTale version of this, because I have 4 kids, and my son was really into this story, and so I think I've watched this VeggieTales version 1,000 times. But it's like that whole hope. Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Daniel, are you there? And go back to the flannel graph thing. They always pull out the flannel graph with the lions there, and Daniel's kind of chilling, and he has a lion couch. He has his arms up on the lion. Everything's kind of cool. And look at Daniel. Look at the response of the king. The king yelled out, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And then look at Daniel's response. He doesn't say, I told you so. He doesn't say, my God is greater. Look at his respect, which once again shows his integrity. O king, live forever. Do you think Darius cared about that? He didn't care about him living forever. He cared about Daniel living longer than he had. And remember, Daniel's 82 years old. Not that a grown, fit man would have a chance against lions, but he had less of a chance. And he says, my God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him and also before you, and I have done no harm. And we see a major theme of God's deliverance. Is that when we've done no harm, when we've done the right thing, God often delivers us. I was found blameless before him and before you. He could say with confidence that he had done nothing wrong, and nobody had found anything that he had done wrong. And then we'll finish up with verse 23. He says, then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of the lion, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. And then Darius wrote to all the people in the nations and language that dwell in earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. So this is where it gets into the really cool story part of it. He pulls Daniel out. There's not one scratch upon him, not even a bruise from throwing him into this pit. Nothing. He's been in a pit all night, and he's totally well rested, and everything's fine. There's not one thing. And so the king is excited. He's like, oh, this is awesome. And then he turns around and he looks at all of those governors and all those satraps. And he's like, throw all of them in there. And not just them, but their children and their wives. Whole families. So we're talking, if there was, 60 of them, we're talking about at least 180 people getting tossed into the lion's den. And before they hit the ground, the lions overpowered them. What a scene. What a scene. And as Christians, a lot of times it's easy for us to kind of go, oh, see, they got their own. They got their own. But in reality, what we want to focus on is that God had protected and provided for Daniel. Because sometimes that retribution isn't going to come. But we need to trust God in his power and his preservation. All right? It's 3:25, 3:30-ish. You guys don't want to go home, do you? Any questions? Any thoughts? Any last parting comments on what we're talking about here?
No homework or anything.
Am I supposed to give you homework?
I don't know.
That's
Did he
why-
say
You guys know because you guys have midterms next week.
That's why he gave us 2 chapters last week.
And
Yeah.
we're gonna turn it in when he gets here?
Oh, I just emailed him.
Yeah, he told me that you guys have midterms next week, so there's no homework this week. So it's just never what?
He said it was like
Oh, it's open Bible and open note. He said that a lot of it's going to be essay form, so we're just going to have to explain concepts.
Did he say that we have to email it, or can we turn it in when he gets here?
I just emailed
They
him.
did?
I did it while I was at Ralph's.
You already did the midterm?
No,
Oh.
the homework, I have Microsoft on my phone,
Oh, okay.
so I just did it while I'm waiting on my Ralph's.
Okay, cool. All right. Any
Thank you.
oh my god,
any other thoughts? Okay.
awesome.
Thanks, guys.